Go ahead. Good afternoon. It's really great to be here. I've really enjoyed myself so far, and I am by no means an expert on sustainability, but I feel like I'm learning so much here, and I really just want to thank Sarah and all the other organizers for putting on such a great conference, and I really have enjoyed just meeting and talking to so many of you who I feel like you've educated me. In the Washington Post real estate section, we've written stories about smart homes, net zero homes, walkability. We've written about the drought in California, and we've written about smart cities. And never would I have thought that you could sort of combine all of these issues together. But that's exactly what we're going to try to do at this session. We're going to try to connect the dots between all these issues. And we're going to talk about where the smart cities movement is now, where it's going, and how you get from here to there, as well as some obstacles that may be encountered along the way. Our panel of experts who will enlighten us this afternoon are James Jackson, Business Development Manager for Emerson in Atlanta. We also have Carrie Hewitt, Director of Sustainability for consulting firm VHB in Watertown, Massachusetts. We have Matthew Pine, Vice President for Marketing at Carrier, and Bill Gray, President of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Upinar. I should have asked you beforehand how to pronounce it. Upinar. And it's funny, though, you all assembled yourself in the exact way I had you in my notes. So we were right on the same wavelength. So we're going to just take a moment, and each panelist is going to just give us a little more information about him or herself. So we'll start with you, James.
Okay. Hi, I'm James Jackson, Business Development Manager at Emerson. My role inside of my group is to help us align our business with the utility and energy efficiency space. I come from the utility industry. I spent almost 13 years working for a utility. And then the last 4 before joining Emerson, I was a consultant for utilities all over the country, so helping design and then implement energy efficiency programs. I have a background in HVAC and in construction. I'm a former HERS rater, so I understand a lot of the people in this room very, very well and what they're trying to achieve on a very large level. I'm excited to be here. The topics have been fantastic. So, yeah, that's me.
Carrie?
My name is Carrie Hewitt, and I am Director of Sustainability for VHB, and we are an East Coast-based engineering, planning, design, environmental consulting firm, and with offices up and down the East Coast. And I am a planner by background, so I'm not going to be bringing any technology expertise, but I hope to talk about why I'm excited about the interplay between technology and sustainability and resiliency. So I work on sustainability management plans with cities, state agencies, and airports, and also lead our corporate sustainability efforts throughout our company.
Great. I'm Matthew Pine. I'm Vice President of Marketing with Carrier. One of the many roles that I have is I'm in charge of our Connected Home team, our digital team, if you will. And I actually had the opportunity last week to spend some sunny days in Las Vegas, beats Indianapolis, and minus, or what was it, 0 the past week. My background, I started in environmental construction out of college, working to help wastewater treatment plants stop having to treat groundwater. Using robotics and grouting down here in Florida. And then worked in HVAC for a number of years. Left the HVAC industry, and I actually worked in what I call the Silicon Valley of Wind. I worked for Vestas Wind Systems in Hamburg, Germany. And then left that role, came back into HVAC, into the role I am today for Carrier. I also have a little bit of solar experience, either through partnerships or also I've designed and have some patents on a solar integration to HVAC. So there's lots of opportunities with IoT and whether it's connected cities or connected homes, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Okay, Bill.
Hi, Bill Gray. I'm the president of Uponor North America. So Uponor is we are the North American division of a Finnish company, Uponor, which is be about 100 years old next year. We do PEX-based or cross-linked polyethylene-based plumbing and heating systems for living spaces. So right in the HVAC space. Most would know us from or some may know us from our former name, Wurzbo, which comes from the original town where the technology was introduced. So I'm really excited to be here. I can't believe sort of the caliber of the events and the speakers and the call to action, first of all. My interest is always in what can I do as a corporate leader to advance the cause at the same time as answer the shareholders' requirements. So trying to look for those synergies between what's right to do and what's right to do for the shareholders is always a big part. I came from the HVAC industry, business degree, some mechanical experience from the Coast Guard. I'm a Canadian who came down to the U.S. about 6 years ago. Probably one of the dumbest Canadians ever because I moved south of the border to live north of where I used to live, and I'm actually colder. So with that, I'm not sure about the expert moniker that you've given us, but with that, I will also turn it back to you.
Okay. As we get started, I just want to ask you all a basic question. And I want you to answer the question not like I'm an expert, but answer the question like I'm a sixth grader, because I kind of am. I kind of have arrested development. Don't answer in big words, but sort of answer it in a way that just a common person who is not an expert in this field would be able to understand it. What is a smart city? What makes a smart city smart? Anybody. It could be one of you. It could be all of you. Just what's a smart city? Anybody. If no one volunteers, then I will call on somebody.
I said this at CES last week. I think we're evolving to smart city. I think, right now I would say we're connected city evolving into smart city. Connected city where you've got devices hooked up to the internet that are providing information to cities to make better decisions. A good example is Big Belly Solar in Massachusetts. That's where they're formed. They're all over the country now. And they enable utilities to go send trucks when the garbage can needs to be emptied, not just put it on a route every day. So that's an example of what I would call connected city. I believe with big data, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, with integrating different disparate systems and creating an ecosystem, I think then your city becomes really smart. So I think we're kind of in this evolution, this is my perspective, of going from connectivity into a smart city.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody want to add to that?
Sure. So to me, a smart city is less about the smarts, because smart is used way too much now. Everything is smart. Your remote's smart, your TV's smart, your phone's smart. It's more of an intelligent infrastructure. So everything from the top to the bottom, all the way down to consumers' appliances being able to self-diagnose or alert homeowners of issues. That's to me what a smart city would be.
Okay. Carrie, do you want to add? I know you have an interesting perspective.
No, I think I would just, on your point about decision making, to me it comes down to arming both municipal agencies, our government, our public services, as well as consumers, regular everyday citizens, with information. And so all of the different technology solutions, which are sort of individual pieces of a connected and intelligent city, come together to really arm people with decisions so they can make smarter decisions about their health, their well-being, and their impact on the environment.
Okay. Bill, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would say following on the themes, it's about the connectedness and the access to information and making informed decisions, and the devices which allow that to happen. I would think anything which sort of promulgates information to make decisions, so that you don't have sort of an elite which sort of owns the information and everybody else which becomes sort of reactive to that. So I think some kind of a democracy of information is really what you're talking about. And then, again, the decision power that can come from that proliferation of information.
Okay. When I think about the smart city of the future, I kind of have a vision of something that kind of boggles the mind, something like the Jetsons, where you have flying cars and you have sidewalks that roll, where you have robots. But can you kind of give us your vision of what a smart city will be like in the next 20 years? Like, for instance, Orlando, if we look out the window, and this is 2037, what are we going to see?
So for me, I guess I can start. The thing that's exciting to me about smart cities is the vision is always sustainability and resiliency for me. That's the long-term vision, and smart cities is actually sort of the means for getting us there. So when we fully integrate all of these technologies, automated vehicles, connected vehicles, smart information technology, so GPS and transit enhancements, so we have real-time data, real-time information, smart sensors that can respond to changes to our infrastructure and immediately make adaptations to that. Those are all resiliency benefits and health benefits and sustainability benefits that help us get to that vision. And so I see a more mobile, a more walkable, healthier, cleaner city that's really enhanced and brought to that vision through all of this integrated and connected technology.
Okay. What about the rest of you? What's your vision for the future?
I mean, from a vision stuff 20 years out, but I think, this evolution that I talked about from connected to smart, right? If you look at connected products today, the capabilities are kind of four-part. One is monitor, the second is control, the third is optimize, and the fourth is autonomy, which is a lot of what you're talking about. And I think that, we're on this journey in this evolution. A lot of the technology that we're implementing today is around monitoring and controlling systems. And this evolution in 20 years is going to be about optimization, right? Self-diagnostic, self-service, prognostication. And then as we get into autonomy, that's where things are just, totally connected in a system of systems environment, and things are just happening behind the scenes and being optimized for sustainability.
Bill?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the Jetsons. I think that's the way it should be, and flying electric cars. So. But no, I mean it's really about how do you, if the trend is towards more urbanization, how do you have sort of the vertical subdivisions instead of the spread out ones? It's about access to how do you live your daily life in the sense of commuting or moving around that city in a efficient way, ways that make it. Right now, if you take transit, it's so inconvenient in a lot of ways. So that convenience factor, the bus comes when it says it's supposed to come, and all those sorts of things. I think the connectedness, the sensor technology, all those things are going to allow that to happen more easily, and I think it's really about how do we live together in tighter density, and do it successfully without sort of getting on each other's nerves. I mean, I think that's the big thing about why don't people want to live in the city. So it's overcoming some of those things that are natural, cause natural resistance.
I know a big thing with smart cities is the data collection. And the fact that we'll have, as you all talked about, we'll have all these sensors that will give us data on a number of things. Given the fact that we'll have all this new information, how will this help us to solve problems in the future? What type of problems do you think we would be able to solve 20 years down the road based on all this new data that we're going to have?
I can take the first stab at that. So to me, our whole goal is to move towards renewables, right? So we're looking at energy storage, we're looking at wind, solar. To take advantage of renewables, you have to use energy more wisely. I mean, that's the bottom line. So with all the data coming from air conditionings and infrastructure and buildings, it's going to allow us the ability to start transferring more into the renewable consumption. During the middle of the day, when the sun's out, we can take advantage of solar. But unfortunately, if a cloud covers your solar array, your air conditioning is probably still running. So having dynamic shifts and dynamic changes will allow you to use more renewable energy. Same goes for heating at night when there's renewables on the grid. So just a responsible use of those types of energies is what I'm hoping for in the future.
So one area, and I think there's so many problems, and I actually really like this question because I think some of the more innovative and aggressive cities that are really taking on and embracing smart technology are those that are thinking about how they can better serve their citizens and are thinking about how do we solve problems with this technology as opposed to just kind of embracing the new fanciest thing. For me, the thing that's really exciting, aside from smart grid and renewable technologies, is our ability to understand mobility and health data. I work a lot around, as well as some of my colleagues at VHB, around healthy community design, which we know is really essential to sustainability planning. And I think the smart technologies and the information that we're going to be able to gain it will work in two ways. First of all, it's providing more information to users, and I think we already touched on this a little bit, but arming them with information to make better decisions about can they take the bus, can they walk this way, can they take a bike, enhancing sort of mode shift in that way. So I think that's one tier. And then I think on the flip side is we sort of know from a common sense perspective that more transit-oriented and bike and pedestrian infrastructure, that kind of development provides for healthier outcomes. But we don't always have great numbers and data that directly support that on a sort of project-by-project basis. And so as planners who are trying to work with various agencies, municipalities, transit agencies, et cetera, who are trying to make informed decisions about where they place their investments, how much are they investing in pedestrian infrastructure, bike infrastructure, transit development, having supportive data that comes from things like the information that we'll get from users in mobile applications or whatnot, or sensor technology, that kind of information is going to be extremely valuable, again, as we make smart investment decisions moving forward.
Matthew?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of those points of view. From an HVAC or connected home point of view, if you think about this today, there's real change that's happening, a real change afoot. Here's a simple example that can, over time, become even more prevalent is people that have a connected thermostat in their home. Because they have a connected thermostat, they have a mobile phone app. And so by nature, they're going to be much more engaged than they were when they just had a control on the wall and they had to walk up to it. And so we see users using the mobile app daily, where they're having, not only are we engaging with our brand daily, which is great, but they're engaging their thermostat. And what we've seen already is that roughly 84% of consumers that have a connected thermostat set a schedule. 84%. And I think the research shows with Energy Star, I think roughly about 5 to 10% of people set a schedule on a regular thermostat. So that engagement, that rich engagement, really drives change. And so 84%, that's a big deal. That's 10 to 15% on average on the heating and cooling bill. So we're already starting to see, we don't have to get 20 years out, we're already starting to see some pretty drastic changes in people's behavior through engagement through IoT, which is pretty promising.
Absolutely.
Right. Bill?
I think
Internet of Things. Sorry.
I think one of the things that in the past has been difficult is the cost of acquiring data. So that now makes that a lot easier. So decisions really aren't so much about my interpretation of facts. Data becomes fact. Right. So it's this notion that we're all arguing. Now we might take our own political spin on data, but it's really we're all working from the same agreed data. And I think from that comes things like behavior changes or different arguing from different points of view. So I think that really the major step forward is the economic collection and acquisition of data, and then policy decisions, et cetera, can be made from an agreed set as opposed to my facts and your facts.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great point.
Now that we've talked a little bit about sort of the future and where we're going, let's talk about let's kind of work backwards and talk about where we are and figure out how we get from where we are now to where we want to go. Matthew and Bill, I wonder if you could talk to us about the role that consumers will play in smart cities. And if you could talk about how there are these new products that will allow consumers to better manage their heating, cooling, and water use, and how that will play into the overall efforts to try to build a smart city.
Yeah, I mean, it's already happening today. I heard this at CES last week. It's changed pretty drastically from year over year. Basically, today, out of what we call broadband households, which is people that have some kind of internet connection, it's about 90 million homes in the U.S. 24% of those people now have a connected device they can control with a smart or mobile phone, which is pretty awesome. And so, like I talked about, this engagement is really happening. It's rich and it's powerful. I think the next thing, the integration in this system of system notion, taking an HVAC system that's connected on its own and making sure it can connect with all the disparate systems in the house is another thing that we've got to put a big focus on in the next probably year or two. We just announced several integrations, and there's lots of people that are doing this with our HVAC system will now integrate with Apple HomeKit. It'll integrate with Amazon Echo, which is a product that's been out on the market pretty hot and heavy for the past months. And so these integrations are really important. So the consumer who's adopting quite rapidly right now, they don't have to deal with 4 different apps or 4 different subsystems. All these different discrete devices can be integrated into one app. So I think that over the next 12 to 24 months, you're going to see the Amazons of the world, the Googles of the world, the Apples of the world are going to become more of the aggregators of the home, probably 50-60% of the homes. And then folks like us, we have to make sure that our systems are compatible. We don't have any notion that we're going to be the aggregator of the connected home, but what we want to do is provide the best HVAC experience and then make sure that can live in other people's ecosystems. So I think as consumer purchase intent is there, as people are adopting, the next phase is we've got to make sure that the systems can work together so they don't get frustrated and they have one rich experience versus 4 or 5 different experiences.
Yeah, I think what you said is really true. It's that notion that it's individuals acting towards sort of their own best interest, which is going to move the needle on some of these things. So it's up to us as manufacturers to really meet that need in the market. I believe if people can do these things, they want to or will, and they want to do those things. I don't think anybody wants to waste water, for example. And if you know where you're using water, it's the old adage in management that you can improve what you measure. Again, it's that acquisition of data. Can you do it effectively? And then what can you learn from the data and those kinds of things. So I believe it's really built on the availability. And if you make it available, I think on the average, people want to do the right thing. They don't want to waste water. They don't want to waste heat. It's just whether you can make it convenient to do so.
Can you, Matthew and Bill, can you tell us about the technology that you're developing that will give the homeowner a sort of a dashboard in alerting them to things that may go wrong in their systems? And these are things that will help them to be able to identify a problem, fix it right away so that they can maintain optimum efficiency in their units. And as a result, they could really better manage and control their use of resources and not waste it.
Is this where we get to do the plug for our company? He promised. So about 12 months ago, we together, or in the course of our innovations effort, we, from the Consumer Electronics Show last year, met up with Belkin. So we had Uponor and Belkin, the consumer electronics company, coming together. They had some technology with their consumer electronics. We were looking for technology. We're in the plumbing and heating business, plumbing and heating systems. And for a long time, we were looking at trying to acquire technology that would allow us to understand what's happening in a typical residential, single-family or multifamily plumbing system. And as it happened, Belkin had that technology, but again, in consumer electronics, that's way different from plumbing. So what you had, in short, was the two companies coming together and really sort of a hand-in-glove type of a fit, taking their pressure sensing technology through pressure sensing and some algorithms and some smart learning software. They're able to actually understand what's happening in a plumbing system, such that, hydraulic signatures, I know I don't want to get too technical, but hydraulic signatures, every device connected to a plumbing system has its own signature that can be measured. And if you can, again, measure and interpret what's happening, you can figure out, one, is the system behaving normally, so is there leaks or other things? How much water is my washing machine or dishwasher or shower and those sorts of things using? And again, through that kind of that or that awareness, you can create conservation. And then through that, you can then have this, kind of smart app that tells you in real time what's happening. So the company that we formed together is called Fin, and that's the basis of intelligent water. I have a lot of hopes for it, not only just in terms of what it can provide the consumer, but again, one of the insights that we had as we went on this journey towards creating and marketing Fin was the data that we can acquire through mass or distributed sensing. We'll be able to actually give policymakers and municipal governments and those sorts of things real-time data about how water is being used in homes. So if you're thinking from an energy or from a water conservation perspective about creating an incentive to go to low flushing toilets, you can actually almost in real time dollarize what that savings would be, and then the upstream side of how do I size municipal infrastructure, sewage treatment plants, water plants, and those sorts of things to deliver the most effective amount of water and all that. One of the things about water, when you think about it, is not only the resource or the scarcity of the resource, it's also by the time it comes to your tap, what's the embedded energy from a pump energy or from just a pump and pipe energy, as well as the electric energy, but the chemicals and things that go into treating water. So really, from a municipal perspective, the last time they've measured quality or even quantity of water is when they push water out into a system. They don't know how long it stays in the system before it comes out of your tap. They don't know all these. There's so much missing information. And again, it's an opportunity to provide information, which again, more information is generally better in terms of creating policy. So.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple areas around data. At CES, we announced a new control last week, and it'll be the first one of its kind. And we're using data and it's public data through what we call application program interface. Basically, it's utility rate data, and we're bringing that into an API into our ecosystem. And now, when a consumer goes to touch the control real time, it'll show them how much energy they're spending when they go up and down in temperature right there at the control. So that's a use of data that's publicly available to inform consumers and make behavioral changes and drive efficiency in conservation. The second thing that we do today and with smart systems is it's not that difficult. It's 2 data points. If you know the outdoor temperature and you know the indoor temperature in your home, you can do a lot. And so we, over about a 2-week period, when a consumer commissions their system, we model their home. We build a thermal model. So we know how that system operates. And everybody in this room's home is uniquely different. How you live in it, the orientation, all the different aspects, how you run your system. So everybody's home's unique. And if we don't have this thermal model, then we apply one standard to everybody, which is sub-optimize. So having this data is really important. The first thing you can do is you can do a virtual audit. Is it precise? No, but it's directionally, close to what a consumer could do. You can give suggestions on what to go do to make their house more efficient based on this audit and having this little bit of information virtually. The second thing that's really interesting that we do is we do a comparison of that consumer's home to their neighbor's home. So we take every home in the state and we compare it against that consumer's home and then how they rank in terms of their efficiency in their home. So people take a lot of pride in that. And we see consumers now taking action because their house is subpar versus the others, their peers, if you will, in that state. And they're taking action to upgrade their house and make it more sustainable. And the third thing in terms of the predictive nature is we know through the thermal model the baseline now of the home and how the system performs. It can be a new system or an existing system. Once we know that baseline, as we see degradation over time, we can alert the consumer to say, hey, listen, your system's not operating efficiently. You need to get a contractor out to check it out. And we also have a contractor portal where we're also giving contractors information if the consumer has permissioned them in. So when they meet up, the vast majority of the time, the contractor now has a lot of information they can save on the service call time, save the consumer money on the service call. They know potentially what the problem is the first time, and they fix it the first time. So there's a lot of benefit through data.
Okay, great. Thanks. James, there's a growing connectedness between homes and utilities. And can you talk a little bit about that growing connectedness and what the role of the utility is in the smart cities movement?
Sure. Yeah, so the discussion Matthew was just having about the connected thermostats with APIs, we also have a connected thermostat that the utilities can actually communicate with through energy partners. So is everybody familiar with demand management in the room? So it's basically you come in and you look at your demand profile and you try to shave the peaks off if you're a utility, just to put in very lay terms. What they're doing with connected thermostats is they're actually doing it in a very dynamic way. They're pre-cooling the house, so it's like charging a battery. And then when the event is going to occur, you actually set the temperature back 4 degrees, most often it's 4 degrees, and let the house coast through as much of that demand event as possible with very little impact to the homeowner. In the old days, it was just a simple switch on the condenser. It shut the outside system off. The inside kept running. The house got hot and humid here in Orlando, Florida, or in the south where I'm from in Georgia, and you get complaints from your consumers. By doing this, you can actually see what's going on the grid. It's like I said, it's a very dynamic process, and utilities are loving it. It's a growing trend with utilities and demand management programs. They actually call it bring your own thermostat programs or bring your own device. So consumers can go to Home Depot, buy one of the Emerson thermostats, connect it, and then agree to have the utility control it if it's available in the area. Another thing that we have going on is very similar to what Carrie was speaking about with air conditioning performance is a product called Comfort Guard, and it is a set of sensors that goes on your entire air conditioning system. Has anybody in the room come home to a failure on your air conditioning? It's awful. It's the worst thing ever. When you have an expectation of walking through your door in your house and the cold air, not humid air blasting you in the face, it's just the best thing ever. Once again, if you're from a hot, humid climate. We have this product to help diagnose issues and ensure homeowners that their system is acting like it should. It's behaving and performing properly. Also, if a part starts failing, it'll alert the homeowner and the contractor that the part's failing before it goes out. So utility programs love this because there's systems everywhere that are installed improperly, have the wrong airspeed, going through them, really dirty filters, not being maintained or cleaned properly. So the utilities can pick and choose which units or which HVAC systems actually get upgraded, cleaned, serviced, or just commissioned properly in the beginning.
Okay. Carrie, one of the things you said to me when we talked on the phone the first time was that everyone at this point is working kind of in their own silos. Like you have consumers, you have the utilities, you have the companies, you have the city. And you said really the key to really expanding the smart cities movement is to get everyone out of the silos, to get everybody talking with each other and working with each other. Can you kind of talk about sort of where we are in that and why it's so important for people to work together?
Sure. And I was just chatting with a gentleman from Orlando earlier who kind of reinforced this concept for me. In sustainability planning, I'm sure a lot of folks in this room can relate to this. You feel like a big part of your job is actually just getting people to talk to each other, breaking down those sort of divisions within city government, different departments, across agencies, across jurisdictions. We're going to need to be better about that as well. And I think that that's especially important with smart cities, especially if we're going to find creative ways to finance these types of solutions. I think we're going to need to be looking at public-private partnerships. I know Orlando is very aggressive on that front, to really figure out the best way to leverage our resources and start to implement these technologies and recognize that just as we think about sustainability in systems, it's all about systems thinking, we have to think about smart cities and smart technologies in systems. And we need to, in order to think about things in that way, we have to break down those barriers and communicate with each other and create a dialogue. I think we've heard that as a common theme today, right, is creating dialogue between each other so we can find that common ground and make sure that we don't have people working on the same efforts independent of each other, because we can get the best, most innovative, most creative solutions when we're actually working together on them, and especially when we have limited resources, perhaps limited federal support, that's going to be more important than ever. So,
okay. So how do we get from point A to point Z? How do we get from 2017 to the vision that you all had for 2037? Are there federal and local laws that need to be changed? Are there new technologies that need to be developed? Are there data that we need that we don't currently have? What would it take to try to move forward? Anybody?
I think it's a combination of all those things. It's the devices, it's the manufacturers working to answer the consumer demands. Again, I think people generally speaking, want to do the right thing. We all know that we can't consume resources without restriction. We know that these things are limited, and I don't think any one of us wants to leave a worse world for our children or ancestors than anything. But, a lot of ways, sometimes you kind of lament the fact that we've entered this age of cheap energy and cheap gas, because we all know that if energy and gas was more expensive, a lot of these things, there's immediate payback. I look at geo-exchange or just energy efficiency, building envelope, those kinds of things. Our solutions in radiant heat, we know they're more efficient, but again, it's that mathematical equation of the output doesn't justify the investment. So I think it's a combination of incentives, leadership. I think leadership is missing in this maybe from the political side. And again, I think there's probably a slight holiday in that for the next few years. So again, we have to take that initiative and keep driving those things and driving the agenda.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question? Do you want me to move to the audience? Okay. So, in all honesty, all this connectedness sounds to me a bit big brotherish. In recent months, there have been bizarre stories about baby monitors being hacked. We have this case in Arkansas this murder case where prosecutors are trying to obtain information from an Amazon Echo, and we have people who put tape over their cameras on their laptops. So the public consumers are very wary of all this data that's being collected on them. Can you talk about how companies and utilities and cities are using the data and what they're doing to try to safeguard it?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, and you need to know this, is consumers can opt in or out, all right? So it's not that you can just get the data. So when we collect data, the consumer always has the option to opt out of giving the data, number one. So that's the first firewall. I think a lot of the issues that have been happening, not that things can't be hacked, but a lot of them are systems that are not, they don't have any form of robust design. They're sitting out with an IP address, not behind a firewall with default passwords. Those are all like pretty basic no-nos of devices. And so I would say that, we've talked a lot. We talked a lot about it at CES around trying to come up with a standard for data privacy. And whether it's kind of a level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and educating consumers, hey, this is a level 1 product. It's only going to have this amount of protection. This level 5, it's going to cost more, but it's going to have all these different levels of protection. So I think it's, we've got to come together not only as an industry within HVAC, but broader industries, and come up with some kind of a scale that gives consumers confidence and educates them on, how they're being protected. So, but I do think a lot of what's happened, some of the basic 1, 2, 3s of data privacy and IT, stewardship were not done properly.
Okay.
I think it's an area where policy is way, or legislation is way behind the developments, and I think that's probably the area where we're going to need significant political leadership. I know just from the Canadian experience, data privacy is one or two notches above the U.S., and then if you look at Europe, it's another few notches above that. In fact, when we look at this Finn company and acquiring data, there's going to be a whole other set of challenges to deploy that product or to sell that product into the European market, simply because of that acquisition of data and what you do. And when you think about water usage in a home, there's a lot that you can infer about an individual or family just from basic water usage.
Right.
So, yeah, we're very cognizant of it. But I think it's hard for manufacturers to set policy. We can be part of the bodies that inform legislators, but it has to come from there.
Okay.
I'll say, just from my perspective, I'm not an expert on cybersecurity by any means, and there's people within my company that can speak much more intelligently about this than myself. But I do know that when we work with cities and other clients, we do try to put measures in place, whether it's confidentiality agreements or ways to manage the data so that it is not actually tied back to specific users or consumers, things like that are getting put into place. I do think that there's much more that needs to be done at a policy level to kind of keep up with this, because I do think that as much as folks are wary of the security threats and sort of the privacy issues, I also think that people see so many benefits to smart technology that they're still adopting it as quickly as possible, as quickly as we can produce it. So I think that policy is going to have no choice but to catch up with this.
Okay. All right. Questions? Lou.
I think anything from a home builder perspective which drives cost is normally avoided. Having been involved in the fire sprinkler business, which I think, again, rationally speaking, if you take the cost out of the equation, everybody would want a fire sprinkler in their home. But again, if it drives cost, it's an affordability issue, and it knocks a certain number of potential buyers out of the market. So I think that's why. The home building industry is about building to codes, so it's setting codes is really where that needs to come from.
Yeah, just to add to that answer, I think that, change is tough. And I think I agree with your point. It's, a lot of builders are production builders, and anything that deviates from the template creates a problem. I think the other thing is when you start integrating smart solutions, IoT, Internet of Things devices, I think there's a concern of when there's a problem, who do you point to, right? I think there's some weariness of, oh, God, I'm going to start introducing these devices, and then consumers are going to start calling me post-sale, and I don't want that. I want to move on to the next house. So I think that's a little bit of the reticence of the builder community, is that it's a little bit intimidating, and I think after post-sale, the customer service level on IoT is a different animal, and I think it takes some thought to think about the business model.
And another thing about Internet of Things devices is once they're in, they're not doing anything until the consumer moves in and connects it to the internet. So, you're kind of relying on your customer to see the value in that product, and a lot of the stuff is customer choice. Myself, I'm an Apple guy. I like Apple products. I have a lot of friends that believe in Android products, and we're starting to see the same kind of segmentation in IoT products as well. Like they're just absolute dead set on being able to check their weather on a thermostat, and some other people like thermostats to look and behave like thermostats. So the builders, I think they're a little weary of that, to be honest, in some of the conversations I've had with them.
Just one more quick point that was brought up about millennials this morning. I think the governor talked about millennials. 32% of all buyers are millennials today. So they care more about technology than curb appeal. So the builders is going to be forced to have to adopt.
I would agree with that as well.
Well, your question dovetails into a question I had, which I'm an architect and have an urban planning background. And so I suppose the answer to why doesn't the building community do this more is education and silos. There's some very basic things that can be done to make a building use less energy and be more comfortable, and none of them are even spoken about today as an example. Here's an example. We talk about a smart city. If we care about energy consumption, and I'm from Austin where Energy Star started, and it was all about managing demand. And the big thing is you don't do a building like this. What's wrong with this room? Look at those windows that face west and these that face east. Just running the grid in a city could cut its energy correctly. The grid, the street grid, could cut its energy consumption by a third to minimize western exposure in southern cities. So my point is, and then also I was surprised we didn't hear anything about the walkability of cities. So maybe my issue I'm concerned about, and I don't think there was anything you can comment on to this because it's very broad, is all four of you zoomed in on the technology approach instead of the creative thinking and design approach, and that worries me a little bit. We'll leave it at that. If we are always relying on all our solutions to be tech-based, don't forget about green by programming, green by design. Thanks.
Do cities risk setting up an interface that won't work with any particular cluster of industrial smart systems?
I don't think so today. I think if you had asked that question 5 years or 7 years ago, yes, would have probably been my answer. I think today, most of the people I talk to in the circles that I travel, everybody is open. So we all have open protocols. So we have a very simple one is an open API allows what we call cloud-to-cloud integration into somebody else's system. So even if you have a closed protocol within whatever system you're selling, whether it's HVAC or plumbing or whatnot, through the open API, you can then send that information out and let somebody consume it, and then you can interact your systems together. So, my answer would be that through cloud integration, and it's taking off over the past 3 or 4 years, that it's not an issue anymore.
I mean, I can speak at a non-technology specific perspective. Again, I don't know how all of these things work because I'm not an engineer of these technologies, but some of what we're starting to learn about are things like sensors within infrastructure, so things like that are in roadways and bridges that can sense rapid increases in precipitation or changes due to temperature. Things like that I think are going to be crucial to understand not only what's happening from a climate change perspective, but to be able to respond quickly to it, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about resiliency. And we should never forget that smart, efficient grids are resilient grids. So I think that's also going to be a huge factor when we're thinking about resiliency and adaptation.
I'm okay.
So what about the utility infrastructure? I mean, as we infrastructure that's funded based on cash flow due to consumption, how are we going to fund our infrastructure with, when we all have LED lights?
That's an exceptional question. And utilities are at the drawing board right now to try to define what their business looks like, whether it's like a prescription-based type of business. There's actually some utilities that are engaged in microgrid and smart communities projects right now to try to figure out what their business is even going to be in the future, which is, I mean, if you take a step back and you think about your job currently, imagine if, in the foreseeable future, it looked completely different. It's got to be terrifying, but it's also got to be very exciting. I know as a consumer, I'm thrilled about it, to think of all the different services and opportunities my utility will provide in the very near future. So they're dealing with it right now. It's on the top of their mind because they can't go to the Public Service Commission and say, hey, we're not selling as much. Let's charge 4 times as much. They're not going to allow it to happen. It's a great question. They are. Yeah.
I think it's also, you have to look at the unintended consequences of maybe some policies and things like water saving. If you're not putting as much water into the system, does the system actually work? So in other words, on the distribution side, it's fine, but what about on the removal of waste side? And there's a lot of stories about that in the sense of, it's great we got all low-flow toilets, and now we can have a smaller municipal pumping station and treatment plant, but what about on the other side? Those pipes don't work unless you put water through them and don't carry away what they're supposed to. So, you have to be aware of maybe on the physical infrastructure of pipes and drains and those sorts of things. So, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. Distributed treatment, smaller, yeah.
Okay, this will be the last question. You in the back. Oh, sorry. Sorry. A quick answer, too. Quick answer.
So it's already on Emerson's roadmap for residential inclusion, and we have products in the commercial space. So catch me after, and I'll talk to you a little bit about it.
Yeah, there's not much time to hit all these different topics when we get questions, but we have an ERV today in play, and it's part of a control system, and it is an issue. As homes become more efficient, they're tighter, and you do need to bring in fresh air, and we have that as an integrated product.
So my last question had to come back to the Jetsons, and this was whether you can have a smart city based on a dumb backbone. So if you have laid out your city foolishly, as we certainly did in Miami-Dade County, where we built density out to the west next to the Everglades with no transit in between, and all of the good amenities are over on the east side of town, and people live on the west side of town, and we've separated, residential from commercial. You can do all the wiring and connectivity you like, but you have fundamentally set up people to live in a bad way. Where, look at the Jetsons. The kids couldn't walk to their next door neighbors. They had to use a rocket ship to go to school. It was really an expensive way to live. And it seems to me that to make a city smarter, the first thing you do is you make the structure of the city inherently smart. You reevaluate the city, re-engineer the city, and the systems. Then you add smart systems on your next iteration round. But we have a sort of a tiered approach, and I think you've got this. I think you guys understand the systems really well. But what's missing from the whole picture is the urban planning. We got a planner up there, and I want to see planners get involved in making these decisions and us putting our resources into reworking a city so it's a place that we want to be, and where living next to each other isn't an impediment but an asset.
Okay. On that note, thank you very much.